agenda. Carter and I were talking about it. The Platte River Trust contract is not quite ready, so we're gonna have to defer that. That's on the agenda with all the other nonprofits that we're approving contracts for. On the 9th, we have a discussion of the Hogan lights on our agenda, and that's not really ready apparently, and I guess we're gonna handle that with a memo to everyone to give a little update on that. The health insurance discussion also needs to be deferred from the 9th to the 23rd, mainly because we have staff out. So, but we'll need to do it on the 23rd because it's kind of urgent to get that done. And because of that, it makes sense to me to defer the ethics discussion a couple weeks, because otherwise the 23rd is we're gonna be here till 10 o'clock. So, everybody okay with those changes? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So, we've got a couple of things to talk about. Police training tool, Carter?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. The request that council had with regard to this topic was to bring forward a recommendation this evening as to how to fund this possibility. As you recall, the project or the tool is in the neighborhood of $90,000. I really believe that excess 1 cent, $15 that are available at this point in time are adequate to cover the purchase of this training opportunity. And so, if it's okay with the council, I'd be happy to make that my recommendation and hopefully get that green light from all of you to move forward with that funding source in mind.
You were originally going to do general fund.
Yes, sir. Right.
Yeah. Any discussion, comments on whether that? What were the other options for 1 cent, 15? Have we had any discussions about that money?
Certainly, you do have some 1 cent, 15 projects coming up in the new fiscal year. But with these dollars that I'm referring to, these are effectively unencumbered dollars that are residual to that particular fund. So,
how do people feel about that? Okay. Guess we're all okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
That was less than 20 minutes. So.
I could call Dallas up on the phone.
Now. Oh, and then I just want to let you all know, like I said last week, I am interested in getting feedback from people on how I've done and do some course corrections if need be. And there's several ways. You can just call me if you want to. We could get together for coffee individually if you'd like. If you want to drop a note, you could just write something up or type something up and give it to Renee. If you want it to be anonymous, you can do that too. And just type something up and give it to Renee and put it in an envelope for me. But I would like to get good feedback from people and see if there's anything I need to do different as we head into the second half of the year.
Yeah.
So, okay. Is that it? I think that's it. Okay.
Out of curiosity, I was just thinking about it. I'm not sure how appropriate, so I'm asking council what their thoughts are. After saying the Pledge of Allegiance, I was wondering if we could do a moment of silence for, of course, Captain Scott Lowe, Brad Menzel, and then, of course, the gentleman from the Korean War, Corporal DeMarket, and just out of reference and respect, just do a moment of silence. But I wasn't sure how council felt about that, or if that's ever been done, or
There is some precedent for that. I think that's a good idea. What do the rest of you think?
Sure. I like the idea.
Okay, let's do that. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else on the agenda tonight that we need to talk about? Concerns, questions?
I don't have an agenda item, but I got a call from a lady on 1000 block of North Jackson regarding weeds. And she said she'd been in contact with the city, but, and I tried to explain to her that due to the rain, we were probably behind if we were going to do some of that. But if get a chance to have somebody take a peek at it. And I didn't get a chance to go by it to see what it looked like.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, can you tell me that area again? Where?
1023 North Jackson.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
we'll just wait till 6 o'clock.
Sounds good. Do we happen to, this is kind of putting Tim on the spot, but did we happen to hear anything on the ball fields over in Crossroads, those scoreboards?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Phil, we did, we looked at them to see if we could fix the situation. That's a little beyond our scope, meaning it's a communication issue between the controllers and the boards. And so we scheduled an appointment with the technician to come out of Colorado that's gonna come and take a look at those. And I didn't hear what the date was on it. It'll probably take a week or two for us to figure it out.
Are you a softball player?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
It rained out last night, if you can believe that.
Well, let
And we had to stand out there, we had to stand out there for 25 minutes until game time so they could officially call it, but there were 3 ponds out there, one at each of the bases. I don't think we're gonna dry in 25 minutes, but they did their job, so.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Do you have anything else? This is the time.
We had an opportunity to visit with the state about the traffic light on CY, and I think it was at Pheasant, right? And they are looking into it and looking to see if their detectors are functioning properly and all that kind of
Because
thing.
they're supposed to see it more, so.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So they're looking into it.
That was the issue, right?
Yep. And hopefully they'll get it fixed. You bet.
I've seen the stripers out, so striping the road, so that's awesome because it's much easier to see.
Oh, yeah.
Now, do we do, like, does the city at all touch, like, Wyoming Boulevard and 2nd Street? Or is that separate totally from us?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, you're exactly right. There's certain portions of the network that many people view as being the cities, but in fact are related to the state and that kind of thing. So we don't stripe state corridors and those kind of things.
So.
Yeah, or repair potholes that they have.
Right. Yeah, I've had several of those.
Well, when they rebuilt CY, I mean, people just had a hard time understanding that was not us.
Yeah, that's right.
When the state rebuilt
The striping report, by the way, should have been in your information packet this week if you got that.
it. Just doing a little blurb on the news tonight about all the construction and asking people to be patient. Every Sunday, I'm talking to people and listening to myself at the same time.
I
Be
like
patient.
because you read some of the stuff and they're like, why can't you put the money into construction and fixing the roads? And then when it comes time to fix the roads, and you have all the people complaining about fixing the roads, it's like, what do you guys want?
Well, while we're on the subject of that, you know, one of my great pet peeves, and I don't think that the city does this, but the highway department sure does it. They'll shut, they'll restrict a huge stretch of road, and there's no one there working. You know, at least what I see around town on city projects, there are people there working. And, that's one of my absolute pet peeves. But if I saw city projects going, like the Headquist project on South Poplar, south of my house, where they had that torn up for weeks and weeks and weeks, and there would be no one there working. I'd be speaking up about that, but I think that the city
We
writes
could have
pretty
Mr.
good
Beamer
word on
comment.
it. I think the city writes pretty good word on this stuff.
I'll decline.
Oh, come on.
Mr. Mayor.
But anyway, though,
If I may build off of that a little bit, Councilman Huber might have forgotten that he and I have a lunch bet on the notion of reopening streets that have been recently paved. Midwest in particular, Councilman. I don't know if you remember that or not.
I don't, but I'm sure you all remember. And I trust your memory more better than I trust my own. So.
I'm just looking forward to that lunch, that's all.
I sure hope the state's finally getting done with the overpass. That's been like 3 years.
Well, they, as of last night,
Montana.
I had to
Oh,
go to a special meeting up
maybe out
north
there.
We'll do it out
that
there.
way, and that would appear to
Then
be
you both
You actually had 4 lanes.
finally done.
live on the
Let's
edge.
hope so.
I'm sure they'll figure out a way to tear it back up.
We'll be talking about that.
Have you heard any more on, what is it, M Street? Or by the river? Or am I asking that too early?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, if you're referring to the possibility of looking at that as being sort of secured, if you will, for city use, that is being worked on, absolutely. But I don't have a proposal quite yet,
No, okay.
not quite.
That's what I just thought I'd ask.
We're getting there.
And then I asked Mr. Beamer, but just double check, I got an email or a message from a gal that asked if council decided to close down the alleyway of B Street by the rescue mission. And I agree with Andrew, I don't believe we ever discussed about shutting that down, but does anybody else?
I think somebody mentioned it, a citizen mentioned it.
Right, but we didn't
Furthest that no.
discuss that or anything, okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
If I could ask on that, what does it take to vacate something like that?
It's basically a council action to do that, yeah.
I mean, essentially it's a driveway that goes to an alley that really doesn't look like it has any use for it anymore.
Your Honor, I will add, if we have utilities, we have a lot of utilities that often run down these alleys. And I think the one you're referring to, I think we actually do have a water main that goes down there. You could vacate the alley, but we would have to reserve an easement over it regardless to maintain our utility service.
We could certainly look into that if council would be interested in us bringing some information back in that regard.
You wanna hear more about that?
Chief has something.
Mayor and Council, I just wanted to report that, in response to some of the citizen concerns, we have gone through there and really done a sweeping of that alleyway. Some of the vehicles that were unlawfully parked there have all been removed. There's been we've completely redone that. But there is access to some of those homes. I'm not sure that that line that, and some of the, can't even call them homes, but they are outbuildings and structures, so. But the police department has gone in there and done a little cleaning of the house.
Good, thank you. Anything else?
I have a question, if we have time here for just some open questions and things. Councilman Walsh and I both called in today on the Joint Powers Board meetings for the jail and the Hall of Justice. And it seems that everything's going pretty well with those things. But it did, afterwards, I got to thinking, does because they said, well, there was like $80-some thousand in the Hall of Justice Joint Powers Board bank account and 60-some thousand for the jail or something. And those numbers, I might not be correct on those. But does the city have like is there like an assessment that we regularly pay, or do we just sort of pony up some money into those things whenever we're asked, or how's that? Do you know offhand how that works, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, what the ideal is that the board will recommend, year to year, what they anticipate the capital needs as being for the Hall of Justice in particular. And generally speaking, we try to budget what it is that they're looking for with regard to general fund dollars or direct distribution dollars or 1 cent dollars to try to meet those needs and expectations, whatever they might be. Typically, however, what we do is we pay into a particular fund every year. I think the Hall of Justice, it's maybe $100,000 a year, and they access those dollars pursuant to the direction of the respective board to do various maintenance kinds of things and whatnot. I think we also pay about $15,000 a month with our relationship as it relates to the operational needs of the Hall of Justice in particular. And so, generally speaking, that $100,000 annual contribution and the $15,000 sort of monthly payment that we make for operations will cover what the needs are typically. But we do from time to time get approached for capital kinds of things, and of course we get your direction and blessing and move forward with whatever it is.
But those amounts that you just talked about, those are just in the regular budget.
Absolutely.
And
That's
I
correct.
kind of thought that was probably what that was, but I just, it was easier to ask that than it was to look in the budget. And see. So
Sure.
being
Yeah.
lazy, I like to ask that.
No problem. No problem.
That's the interest of safety.
Just for being lazy.
What's the name of the soldier that died again?
Corporal DeMarket, Martson, M-A-R-S-T-O-N. Kirtley, K-I-R-T-L-E-Y.
Oh, you mean
So when I wrote it down, it's DeMarket, and I think his middle name is Marston, M-A-R-S-T-O-N. Last name is Kirtley, K-I-R-T-L-E-Y.
I thought Marston was the last name for some reason. Okay, we will do that.
Can I make one comment about one thing?
Yes, I was gonna ask about this.
Sure.
So does this factor into our second reading, is that right tonight?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you have a letter pertaining to the ordinance regarding
This is just our hearing.
wireless facilities and access to right-of-way and so on. This effectively are the comments that this firm representing Verizon would like to not only enter into the record, but potentially seek your approval for some of the changes that they're identifying in this letter. And so in that regard, I would assume this would be a letter that would be entered into the record. But furthermore, I would suggest to you that we'd be active in reaching out to these folks and working through some of their comments and discussions, and maybe you can bring it back a proposal that might address some of these, or maybe not, depending on what it is that their suggestions might do by way of impact of what we're proposing. So if it pleases the council, we'll be happy to follow up on this, but you should note that this is probably an item of record and as it relates to the reading of the ordinance this evening.
Would you recommend that we postpone them tonight, or should we recommend going through first reading and then making changes based on this?
The latter. We go ahead and go forward with the first reading, recognizing that as a part of the reading process, we'll work to go through these issues with these folks' client.
Unless people hear things in the public comment that changes their minds and want something different, that's the whole point of the public comment.
So do you need action by council tonight to do that, or just start on it?
What I think Carter's saying is, if we're satisfied with the ordinance as it's written and
Okay.
nothing changes with public comment, we can go ahead and pass on first reading, and then when we do second reading in 2 weeks, we may have some amendments. Is that fair? Okay.
Fair. Fair.
All right, so
Work.
Rick,
Thank you, sir.
Let me give these two.
Lord?
What? Give these to you?
I now call the July 2nd, 2019 regular council meeting to order. Would council members please denote your presence by depressing your yes switch. Chair would entertain a motion to, by minute action, excuse the absence of Councilman Pacheco and Councilman Walsh.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Councilman Huber and seconded by Councilman Hopkins. Please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Thank you, and council members are televised on channel 192. Would anyone care to come to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Some brave soul that would like to do their patriotic duty here. Thank you, Mr. Pad. I'll do it tonight. Whenever you're ready, sir.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Pad. I'd like to thank Councilman Bates for reminding us that we've suffered some losses recently. And so I'm going to ask for a moment of silence for Captain Lowe from our fire department, who died recently, for Bradley Munzel, a longtime city employee that was appreciated and known by many of us. And then also recognize Corporal Demerit Marston Kirtley, the Korean War veteran whose remains were recently discovered and returned to Wyoming. And he's finally home after, I believe, about 50 years. Is that?
He's 65 now.
So almost 50 years. So let's just have a moment of silence for all three of those individuals, if we could. Thank you. Okay, moving on with our agenda. The chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the minutes of the June 18, 2019 regular council meeting as published in the Casper Star Tribune on June 25th, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Johnson, seconded by Councilman Friel. Any amendments to those minutes? Please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the July 2nd, 2019 bills and claims as audited by City Manager Napier.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Johnson, seconded by Councilman Bates. Any abstentions? Please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Thank you. Now is the time we invite anyone in the audience who wishes to come forward to speak with the council to do so. And I believe the rules are stated on our first page. Please keep your comments limited to 5 minutes. And we will not respond to personnel matters, and please no attacks on staff or members of council. Good evening, sir.
How are you doing today? Craig Sheets, Orange County, California. This meeting is for my dad, Gil Sheets, who's no longer with us, passed away about 3 years ago, and as well, myself, being a recovered cocaine addict of 21 years, November. Our military bases, for a fact, are storing cocaine and heroin to be distributed to the streets. We know where it starts out. It's high schools. I'm hearing it's junior highs now. It's a little bit early for kids to be getting on that stuff. So Leadville, Colorado, tons of it. Along with projectiles. I don't know if anybody knows what ordnance means. It came over from England. No one is allowed to point a projectile at another subject for any manner at all. I think it still sticks, and lobby attorneys and all this other stuff kind of getting away with that. And then as well, the sister to that would be Area 51. I've already spoken on that in other states and hit Orange County with it pretty heavy. Here was an ex-P2P ran by the Army in Brea, California. I went into this underground lab, Mayor, myself, and saw the wiring coming out for all the cooking stuff that they had removed. So I've actually been down inside that one. It's an old one that they abandoned. Then we have Salvation Army rehab programs. They're bunk beds to shelters as well, supporting this drug problem we have in the nation. They have no success rate with these programs at all, none. It's about a 1% When I quit, I did it on my own, and that's the only way to do it. As well, we got Leadville, Colorado. That's the closest base to you guys, pretty close, I think, except for the Air Force Base in Cheyenne. But I think this is where a lot of cocaine's at, to be distributed towards your direction, and bigger metro areas, Denver, that type of thing. So Leadville and the salt mines of Missouri and Kansas City, as well, harboring cocaine for our youth. Then we have a train I missed last time I was here. These nuclear devices are pointed at tankers. They don't need any missiles for the hotshot train. That's a container that has a nuclear device cradled inside of it, installed, and I'm not too sure how they, detonate that. I would imagine a cell phone would do it. So that can be parked anywhere. These trains can go anywhere, park anywhere, probably right along a gas refinery, oil refineries is probably where they'd put it, to enhance the blast. And then, like I told the chief, I'll be moving on in August 1st, getting the ranches and the farms harboring meth labs. So I'll be moving on at the August 1st. I'll do one more meeting on the school bus. There's a thing in there, a chart on blood, and I'm going to enhance that document on vision as well. I'll be in for one more meeting with you people on that. And I appreciate you letting me speak. I really do. Thanks, Casper.
Got questions for Mr. Sheets? I have one. When did you achieve sobriety?
Oh, I've been sober for 21 years. I'd still have a couple cocktails here and there, but no more narcotics.
Congratulations.
36 years, no marijuana, and 21, no cocaine. Yep. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Sheets? Okay.
Thank you for letting me speak.
You bet. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Sheets and Mr. Mayor, with your indulgence, you mentioned your dad was Bill Sheets.
Gilbert.
Gilbert, okay. Did your grandparents live here in Casper?
No, I was born and raised in
Okay.
Fullerton, California.
I knew a Sheets family here many years ago, and they were very nice people, and especially your who would have been your grandmother.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much.
Real
Yeah.
sweet, nice lady.
I try my best. It's the world's getting a little tougher out there, but try to stay nice.
Well, good.
Yeah, it's the better way to go. I agree.
I joined the mayor on congratulating you for your.
Hey, I appreciate that. I really do, Mike. Thank you.
Good.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Christy L. Houston. My address is P.O. Box 50146, Casper, Wyoming. Thank you, council members and administrative agents for the City of Casper, for allowing me to address you today. I come from a family of motorcyclists. In May 2019, I was apprised of a situation involving motorcyclists in our community. This situation involved waning support for a long-held tradition in our community, a motorcycle safety and awareness parade. At the last City Council meeting on June 18th, council members and the public addressed concerns over permitting, fees, and insurance requirements, which last May had disrupted the parade route and threatened subsequent fundraising events and parades. City Council members repeatedly used the word ambiguous when referring to city ordinances. I do not possess a Juris Doctorate, nor am I barred like some of the members on this board. Through a network of contacts and recent news articles, I have been informed of some issues which may be prudent for us all to review. To begin, the 1992 U.S. Supreme Court case Forsyth questioned whether an ordinance with varying fees for assembling or parading reflecting the estimated cost of maintaining public order violated the free speech guarantees of the First and 14th Amendments. The Supreme Court held the ordinance unconstitutional, stating permitting to charge fees to groups without any objective standards violated the First and 14th Amendments. Furthermore, serious concerns are raised when words like ambiguous language are used by administrative agents. The issue of ambiguous language and the Administrative Procedures Act was addressed by the U.S. Supreme Court June 26, 2019. In Kaiser, Justice Kagan opined that our deference can only be considered when a regulation is genuinely ambiguous, and the agency's construction of its rules must still be reasonable. The Kaiser case looked at prior rulings of our deference in the Chevron case, which established tests for reviewing an agency's construction of statutes which it administers. If Congress has directly spoken to the precise questions at issue, then that is the end of the matter. A contrary agency interpretation must give way. It is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is, according to Marbury versus Madison. The rise of the modern administrative state has not changed that duty. Indeed, the Procedures Act governing judicial review of most agency actions instructs reviewing courts to decide all relevant questions of law. Additionally, in recent local news, a series of K2 articles were published. You may have seen one of them on May 14, 2019. The headline read, "Casper police received intelligence about possible bike gang activity at the parade," according to a reporter. While not going into detail, the suggestion that riders in the recent motorcycle awareness parade not wear colors came from information about an outlaw biker gang possibly threatening violence. Casper Police Chief Keith McPheeters said the police department had been receiving credible intelligence from reputable sources about motorcycle gangs intending to set up a chapter in Casper, and that rival gangs wanted a territory, McPheeters told the Casper City Council work session. Because of the intelligence, McPheeters asked some parade organizers to keep the parade about motorcycle safety and not about specific organizations or the color and insignia that identify those organizations. Law enforcement officers must be able to clearly articulate their use of probable cause in a sworn statement called an affidavit of probable cause. If probable cause isn't supported by facts and evidence, improper police action could result. Due process requires notice of proceedings and an opportunity to be heard before the government acts to take away life, liberty, and property. Due process is also a constitutional guarantee that a law shall not be unreasonable, arbitrary, or capricious. Defamation and libel are other legal definitions. Defamation is vilification through communication.
45 seconds, just so you know.
Defamation and libel are other legal definitions. Defamation is vilification through communication or a false statement that harms the reputation of an individual, person, or group. To conclude, motorcyclists are from all creeds and differing backgrounds. They work together in the community and throughout the nation for a common purpose. They support awareness, safety, freedom, and rights in numerous charities. With dialogue between the community and its officials, we must work together to find clear and concise language that supports the shared and common purpose of providing safety, awareness that protects rights and freedoms of all citizens. Thank you.
Questions? Dr. Al Houston, is that correct? Questions for Dr. Al Houston? Thank you. And Mr. Henley, were we going to go over your work on the ordinance and the resolution at some point? Could we do that next week in a work session, perhaps?
I would anticipate that would be probably the way to go. That way we would have people to communicate about it. And I would anticipate a memo for you so that the public would have some background, but at the same time, I wouldn't get into my legal reasoning. That would remain attorney-client confidential.
Okay. Is there anything Dr. Al Houston said that we would need to incorporate into those discussions? So there was a lot of meat in there. So
yeah, there were a lot of references to citation and cases, but
yeah.
I will certainly listen to what these folks have to say.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Al Houston? Okay. Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Jessica Rogers and I live at 2850 East 7th Street, and I am myself a motorcyclist as well. And we wanted to discuss also the Dillon Rule and the Home Rule. And there was a paper published by Honorable John D. Russell and Aaron Bostrom titled Federalism, Dillon Rule, and Home Rule. Explains the significance and relevance of the so-called fight referenced in the Oil City News on June 19, 2019. The so-called fight is a fight in regards to administrative procedure. Throughout history, federal, state, and local governments have vied for power. The Founding Fathers, through the Federalist Papers and Constitution, provided a framework to assist each level of government to function. But the struggle for power within the levels of government has continued. In the late 1800s, there are two prevailing rules that came about to address powers granted by municipalities. Wyoming has adopted both rules, the Dillon Rule and the Home Rule. Justice Dillon provided the language known as the Dillon Rule. A municipality possesses and exercises the following powers and no others. First, those granted in the words from the state. Second, those necessarily implied or necessarily incident to the powers expressly granted. Third, those absolutely essential to the declared objects and purposes of the municipality, not simply convenient, but indispensable. And fourth, any fair doubt as to the existence of a power is resolved by the courts against the municipalities. Since the local government's power is derived from the state, the local government is strictly limited to what the state delegates to it. If a local government supersedes the authority it is given, the state has the power to modify or revoke its powers. Ultimately, under the Dillon Rule, local governments are tenants of the state. The Dillon Rule is consistent with the principles of federalism and the Constitution. Without commonality between local governments on issues, businesses find more red tape than opportunity, making it difficult for the state and businesses to prosper. Lastly, consistently throughout the states prevents local jurisdictions from taking ill-advised risks. Consistent uniformity protected by the Dillon Rule is a prerequisite for statewide stability and prosperity. To negate the Dillon Rule, local governments have pushed for states to pass Home Rule legislation. In 1871, Judge Thomas Cooley challenged the Dillon Rule by holding that local governments possess some inherent rights. Whether through constitutional or legislative changes made by the state, Home Rule charters permit local governments to conservatively pass ordinance as they see fit. Conservatively, provided they abide by the state laws and constitutions. Home Rule also has its own set of problems. States with Home Rule are more apt to lack uniformity, beneficial to businesses and citizens alike. Unlike the Dillon Rule states, Home Rule states present a limited framework of what local governments can or cannot do. To compensate, Home Rule states might pass a slew of laws that prohibit a wide range of practices at local level. Rather than blame the technicalities of the system, local government should focus on creating an optimal working relationship with the state regardless of which rule is in place. To resolve the issue, there must be open dialogue between members of the community, all levels of government, and clear and concise language in all policies and procedures within its jurisdiction.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Ms. Rogers? Okay. You correctly point out that we are a creation of the state. So that is true. And our powers are defined by the state.
Mayor, Council, Paul Pad, Cherokee Lane, Casper, Wyoming. I don't know that I'm going to be able to speak that eloquent, but basically I've been asked several times over the past couple of months here, why the fight over such a small amount of money? And quite frankly, Mr. Mayor, it's not about the amount of money itself. Yeah, that amount of money doubled for 2 parades, feeds, 10 plus families at the holidays. But what it's about is the rule of law. What it's about is whether or not members of the city of Casper, staff, administrative offices, this council, and when I say this council, I mean this council as a group, not necessarily the current members, but this council and in fact the chief of police, whether or not they're going to follow the law that is written and as written. There was the word ambiguity was thrown around. We were talking about between the special events guide compared to the city ordinances. Ambiguity to me means that there's more than one way to interpret something. I don't really think there is any more than one way to interpret the law. The law is what it is. Our state statutes under Title 15 basically tells, throughout that title, gives instruction to municipalities as to the legal and proper way to enact ordinances. And in fact, 117 entitled Ordinances, Amendments, and Repeal states in part, in the first sentence of it is, amendments and repeals of ordinances or sections thereof shall be by ordinance. So in other words, what this is saying is that you cannot override an ordinance simply by passing by resolution or adopting by resolution some set of rules or guides. What it's saying is that the ordinances are still prevailing. If you wish to change the ordinance, you have to do it by an ordinance, and that's how it is. So that's basically where I'm at. I'm not going to take up my entire 5 minutes tonight. I'm just going to say this is where we're at. We just want to make sure there is a saying, an old saying, and that ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I think if the general public is to be held to that standard in a court, then so should our city officials and certainly our chief of police. I mean, that's a standard that we've all had to live to and have heard most of our lives. So with that, Mr. Mayor, the only other thing I would ask is that I believe city attorney said that he had a memo or guidance that was to be kept private. I mean, is the city attorney not work for the city? I think that should be made public, what his guidance is and what his suggestions are. I think that should be made public. And I do want to thank city attorney for sitting down with me the Friday before last and talking about it, and some of the council that I was able to get in touch with and spoke on a one-on-one. And I wanted to thank city manager for getting me a couple weeks ago that guide in a timely manner as he did. So I do appreciate that. I just think that going forward, we just have to get this resolved so that we can certainly get back to having a good working relationship as we did before with the council, motorcycle community, city police, and the city of Casper residents in general. So hopefully with that, we can get back to that. The other thing is, if there was any discussion or decision as to whether or not the city would reimburse that insurance fee.
We have not discussed that.
Okay, is it still open for discussion or has not been decided?
I believe we're going to discuss the ordinance and the resolution next week. So we'll see if council members want to discuss that issue as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Henley, just for Mr. Pad's clarification, the only information you could provide privately to us would be if it involved a personnel matter or some type of land acquisition matter. Would that be correct?
No, any type of legal conundrum that I would advise you on. That would all be attorney-client privilege. And that's basically, I did in fact write you all a letter today, and it would be attorney-client privilege.
Ah, okay, thank you. So, but we could discuss this, Mr. Pad's suggestion that we have a conflict between our resolution and our ordinance in open meeting.
Certainly.
Okay.
But if I might, I just want to clarify, so the public is not to have access or knowledge of guidance our city attorney gives to the council?
We're going to discuss in open meeting the very matter that you brought to our attention.
At the work session? Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just clarified. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Councilman Bates.
Mr. Paul, you said you want to get this resolved, and I guess my question to you would be, we're going to iron out the special events guide and the ordinance and everything, and we'll get that ironed out. I guess, I'm for bikers. I love motorcycles. The other day on Indian Paintbrush, I walked by two of them that I don't say it very often, but were two of the most sexiest bikes I've ever seen. Okay, in all honesty. I like it. I like bikers. I have no issues with them whatsoever, and I don't believe anybody on this council does. We want a good working relationship. Besides that, can we continue to have a good working relationship?
I would certainly hope so, and like I say, one of the biggest things that came forward is, as we know, there were things that were messaged to the public that were just not true, but we also know that the way the permitting process was handled this year was not according to the law as the law is written, and that's another thing that we would like to get straightened out and make sure that everything's according to Hoyle, if you will, if you want to use that expression. You know, so, and I think we can, you know, in the past we have worked together to do public service announcements, which should be back on television here this week. I spoke with them again today, tried to get a couple of those back up and running that we've made. You know, we've always just had a good back and forth and a communication between, you know, if there was any issues, we always had that before. This past year and a half or so, it seems like we haven't had that. We need to get back that. We need to be able to communicate without being told. We need to be able to communicate without having demands made on us unreasonable. That, you know, if we feel they're unreasonable demands, we'd just like somebody to say, well, let's talk about this. Let's just not make a demand and say that, well, you know, it's my way or the highway type thing. And that's kind of the way it's been trending recently, and we want to get away from that. We want to get back to where we can communicate better.
We had another question or comment, Councilman Huber.
Mr. Mayor, I would just ask for a moment of indulgence. Mr. Pratt, I want to assure you and anyone else that's interested in this, that any of the comments that I have made on this subject have been intended only for the purpose of trying to reassure you and your group that based on my knowledge of all of this subject going back a good many years, this is not some requirement that was just cooked up this year to in any manner impinge or infringe on your organization or anything. My effort and my sole and only intent was to try to reassure you folks in that regard. I don't know if that has not been successful, if my tone or if anything else has been in any other manner on that. I apologize for that. I certainly don't want to come across as a know-it-all or anything like that, because I recognize that I don't know it all on a lot of things. But my whole purpose was only to try to reassure you folks that based on my knowledge and understanding, you were not being singled out, persecuted, prosecuted, or anything like that. If I came across in any other manner, I apologize for that. But I would please recognize that you accept the purity of my intentions in that.
I appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, I would say that, you know, I know at the last meeting my frustrations overflowed somewhat, and which is, I think, all the years I've been coming in here. I would hope that you realize it's not a normal for me. My frustrations were added to through several things, the way the comment session was done. I wanted to say thank you for putting this back to the previous way of taking public comment. And also that, you know, on the specific issue that Councilman Huber was speaking of in that time was that, you know, I understand that he's saying what his point was from that, but what my point was is the way it was handled was not by city ordinances, and that the city ordinances, as far as I can remember, have never read to that. And I did kind of feel like I was being personally addressed on that, and I take Mr. Huber's word that he was not, so I appreciate that.
Let's just try to take it from here and we'll all do better.
All righty. Thank you.
Good evening.
Mayor, council members, Keith Goodenough, 333 South Saconee. I decided I needed to come down here on the week of July 4th to participate in our democracy because, after all, July 4th is about civilian politicians crafting good government, founding fathers. So it's not about tanks and airplanes. There's other dates for that. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. My comments are directed at the 1 cent allocations. And I don't know if anybody wants to educate me after I'm done. I'd always appreciate that. My first comment is on the amount of money that's going to the Boys and Girls Club, $230,000. I sometimes wonder why the council sees the need to fund organizations that are already very well funded. If I recall correctly, this year or last year, the year before, the Boys and Girls Club had a breakfast that raised almost $1 million in cash and pledges. And so why the city council sees the need to subsidize an organization that's already doing very well financially, as far as I know, I think that's a question. And especially when you compare it to the fact that poverty resistance, that helps a large number of people with very little money. They had a request for $35,000, I was told, to buy a refrigerated truck to help them with their efforts to feed the people of Casper, and they're not on the list. So if I'm sure there was some rationale for that, but to me, it seems odd. The other comment I have has to do with the Central Wyoming Rescue Mission, and I think it's true that the rescue mission has a heavy tilt towards Christianity, and which is all fine as long as there's no public money involved. But now you're giving them $116,000. So my question would be, if you care to answer it, is whether or not there's any assurances that the people who are using the rescue mission are not being required to go through Bible classes, or are they treating people who don't care to go down their particular religious path? Are they being treated the same, or are they being treated differently? So I think that's important to keep in mind. It's public money, and public money should not be funding a religious organization unless there's some assurance that there's no connection between getting the service and participating in the religious practices of that particular group. So those were my only comments, although now that I think about it, I do have one more. 4 years ago, the 1 cent process was done as well, and the city council funded the Masterson House, which was an adjunct of the hospital or the hospital foundation, I can't remember quite which, but they funded the Masterson House to the tune of $270,000, something like that. And so now the Masterson House has been sold, and the city put $270,000 in it. Then it was sold to a private group. I think they're rehabbing it as a full-fledged motel. Does the city get anything out of that? And what was the money used for in the first place? And then again, it's a situation where the hospital and the hospital foundation has large amounts of funds to work with without the city subsidizing them. So it just seems like a pattern where some of these groups that have a lot of resources get subsidized by the city, but a smaller place like Poverty Resistance that feeds people every day in large numbers, they don't get any consideration at all. So I wanted to make, my timing's just about right. So thank you very much for your service. July 4th, Founding Fathers, civilian rule of the government. I think that's what July 4th is all about. So thank you.
Questions for Mr. Goodenough? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll respond to your questions when we're done here, but good evening.
Mileage Mike, 742 North Jefferson. I also would like to apologize for the outburst of last council meeting. I have a hell of a time trying to express myself at times, and even though I don't know what I want to say, I want to know what I already know what I want to say, but people don't understand the way I say it. We were referring to the city of Casper, not the fair and rodeo that's county. And we've tried to express that through some of the council, and it's like they haven't heard. Whatever they do in the county, that's nothing to do with us. Nothing at all. Including the fair and rodeo, even though the fair and rodeo is in Casper, Wyoming. It's still a county event. So that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Harrison? Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Goodenough, what I would describe to you as I recall, the issue was, as far as agencies that received no funding, was that council, I was actually absent for this meeting, but council decided that we had to have 5 votes for each agency that received funding, and if they didn't get 5 votes, they received none. And that's what happened with poverty resistance, which I was personally disappointed to see, but that's what happened. And then the rest of those amounts were simply averaged figures from all of the recommendations from council once those 5 votes were obtained. And it was based on the rationale we received from each one, and I can't recall the exact rationale for each of those agencies, but we'd have to go back into the minutes to see all of those. But they did give us, each gave us individual proposals as far as what they were going to spend the money on. So, okay, anyone else? Public comment. Okay. Right. I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the ordinance amending the code pertaining to wireless communication facilities. Mr. City Attorney, do you have exhibits?
Thank you, Mayor. We have one exhibit, exhibit number 1, correspondence from John Henley to J. Carter Napier, dated June 24, 2019.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is the opportunity that council has to reconcile the requirements of the ordinances with regard to the FCC communication that came out in, I want to say in September of last year. Council will note and acknowledge that indeed we did get some written comments from representatives of the Verizon Wireless Company. Those comments of which we have been advised by this group to take into consideration and potentially bring back recommendations for second or third reading as it relates to potential changes that staff might recommend.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. And public comments are again limited to 5 minutes. Is anyone here to speak on the wireless communication facilities ordinance? Okay. There being no one to speak for or against this ordinance, I now declare the public hearing closed. Please read the ordinance, by title only.
An ordinance amending section 17.12.124 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to wireless communication facilities.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilwoman Lutz. Any discussion on this matter? I think for everyone's benefit, we're trying to get ahead of the curve on this because there are some rates that were established at the federal level that were very low. And this really has to do with public property being used for private purposes and the public getting some reasonable reimbursement for the use of public property for those facilities. And so, are there any other amendments? And we may see some amendments following the review of comment. But if there are no other amendments, then please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Thank you. Chair will now discuss the ordinance amending the municipal code pertaining to site plans. This item will also be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance amending section 17.12.150 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to site plans.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second that.
Moved by Councilman Friel, I think seconded by Councilman Huber. Any discussion on this matter? I think we've got this resolved. Any amendments? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passed.
Council will now discuss the ordinance amending the municipal code pertaining to PUD approval. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance again on third reading by title only.
An ordinance amending section 17.52.100 and 17.52.110 of the Casper Municipal Code about PUD approval.
Thank you. The chair would entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilwoman Lutz, seconded by Vice Mayor Johnson. Council will now listen to public comment if anyone is here to comment on the PUD approval amendments. Anyone here for that? Discussion amongst council? Just clarify for people, basically we're lining up our ordinances with state statute. That's really what we're doing here to make sure that they're aligned as they should be. Any amendments? Please cast your vote and please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
This is a similar item. Council will now discuss the ordinance amending the municipal code pertaining to subdivisions. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance amending section 16.08.040 of the Casper Municipal Code to harmonize with Wyoming statutes.
Thank you. The chair would entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Bates. Any discussion on this matter? Councilwoman Lutz.
Just a spelling correction in the title, with is just misspelled.
Okay, can we make that change? Okay, great, thank you. Any other discussion, amendments? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Council will now discuss the ordinance regarding camping in city limits. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance amending section 9.48 of the Casper Municipal Code regarding camping in the city limits.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Bates, seconded by Councilman Friel. Council will now listen to public comment. Is anyone here this evening to talk about the camping ordinance in the city limits? Okay. Any discussion amongst council? Councilman Huber.
Mr. Mayor, I will be voting no on this amendment, not because I don't think that our current ordinance needs some improving. I think our current ordinance does need some improving. However, I still continue to disagree with the idea that we are just removing all restrictions on camping so that anybody anywhere in town can unrestrictedly camp on any private property that they want to. And I think that's a big mistake, and I'm going to be voting against this. And I would invite any members of the council to join with me in moving to amend this amendment to put some reasonable restrictions on this private camping. But other than that, I'll be opposing this.
Other discussion? I will be voting no, as I did on the first two readings, for the same reason. And we'll see how this works, and hopefully we're wrong. So, any amendments? Please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
With Councilmember Huber and Mayor Powell voting nay, motion passed.
Council will now discuss the ordinance amending small trader parking. This item will also be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance amending Chapter 10 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to parking.
Okay, Chair would entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Bates, seconded by Councilwoman Lutz. Any discussion? And for everyone's information, we're basically including small trailers in the ordinance that regulates parking on the street, so that we don't have trailers parked for extended periods of time on the streets. Any other discussion? Amendments? Please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
With Councilmember Hopkins voting nay, motion passed.
Council will now discuss the Fleming addition. This item will also be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Chair would please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance approving the Fleming subdivision agreement and the final plat of the Fleming addition.
Thank you. Chair would entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Bates. Council will now listen to public comment. Is anyone here to speak on the Fleming addition this evening? Okay. Okay, any discussion amongst council members on the Fleming addition? Okay, any amendments? If not, please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Council will now discuss the rezoning of 221 and 227 North Park Street. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance approving a zone change of Block 60, Lot 9, and the north 20 feet of Lot 10, and Block 60, west half of the lots 10 through 12, accepting the north 20 feet of Lot 10, Casper Addition subdivision in the city of Casper, Wyoming.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Johnson, seconded by Councilman Bates. Council will now listen to public comment on this matter. And again, public comments are limited to 5 minutes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Brad Hopkins, 230 North Park, Executive Director over at Wyoming Rescue Mission. You're on a roll, so I will take way less than 5 minutes just to say thank you for and council for your unanimous approval on the first reading, and thank you for consideration on this second. This is an essential support to those in our community that struggle with homelessness and poverty, a subset of the population that we now serve at the new Park Street Center, who have entered into our discipleship recovery program, struggling through and overcoming, in most cases, substance addiction through our AA-based recovery program. So, thank you.
Questions for Mr. Hopkins?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Huber.
This is a little bit off subject, and Mr. Goodenough has departed, I think. But my understanding always has been that you folks have been careful about sequestering public funds that you get from your spiritual activities. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, sir, you are. The 116 approved for 1 cent is going towards the Park Street Center that was constructed and helping us with over $100,000 of demolition expense of the old facility. So while we are compelled by our faith in Christ and read that he helped, we also read that he helped everybody, whether they believed in him or not. And so there is no faith requirement for services in the facility that you're funding through 1 cent monies, which this rezoning is a completely separate project from that. But
Well, and that had been my understanding also, and I wanted to kind of make that clear on the record and give you an opportunity to clarify that on the record. Thank you.
thank you for doing that. I was wanting to corner him afterwards, but it looks like Mr. Goodenough headed out, so thank you.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Hopkins? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to speak on this rezoning that creates the possibility for the rescue mission to go through this expansion project? Okay, any other discussion amongst council? Any amendments? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Please read the consent resolutions by title only. Am I in the right spot?
I believe we need to address item 8C.
Did it again. I wonder, really, it was not intentional. The council will now discuss the amendments regarding mobile vendor parking. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance amending Chapter 10.36.031 of the Casper Municipal Code.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Johnson, seconded by Councilman Bates. Council will now listen to public comment. Is anyone here to speak this evening on the mobile vendor parking amendments? Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Dave Hinton. I live at 1035 Monte Vista Drive. For those of you who don't know me, I operate Lefty's Barbecue and Catering. I want to thank you for exempting me from the fire suppression system. I do appreciate that very much. My reason for being here tonight is I'm in a bit of a pickle. I have two different agencies that I have to follow the rules and ordinances of, one being the city of Casper, the other being the health department. The health department requires me to operate off of what they call a temporary permit. One of the stipulations of that temporary permit is that all the food has to be prepared on site. My food takes 10, 12 hours to cook. On the other hand, the city does not allow me to set up on a public street until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which would mean the food that I prepare wouldn't be done until midnight. I suspect that most people will be home and in bed by that time. So that's the predicament I find myself in. I can't cook it somewhere else, bring it there, and then follow the guidelines of the city and the health department together. So I guess I would urge you to reconsider this 3 o'clock in the afternoon time frame. I know this food truck business has been a real thorn in your side, but I think by opening that can of worms last summer, I think the worms are running everywhere, and you haven't been able to figure out how to get them back in the can, so to speak. You pass an ordinance for one thing, and it affects two other things somewhere else. So I don't know what your solution is, and I may be the only one in that boat with the time constraints, but I would urge you to please reconsider time, if that's what we're talking about tonight, so. That's all I have.
Well, for clarification, what we're doing is giving ourselves the latitude to make exceptions to that 3 p.m. limitation.
Okay.
On a case-by-case basis, but questions from Mr. Hinton? Councilman Hubert.
And sir, I'm asking what's probably kind of a dumb but an obvious question.
Yes.
The health department, you know, I understand that they sit there and they tell, for instance, restaurants, you can't prepare anything at home, bring it in and serve it in your restaurant. You have to fix it all here in the
Correct.
restaurant kitchen.
Correct.
I'm not quite understanding why, if you prepare something in your trailer, why you can't start it cooking somewhere else and then bring it to
Nice shirt, by the way.
But which part is true? I'm really confused.
I don't have an enclosed trailer. It's an open trailer.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't qualify under the regulations for the health department as a commercial kitchen. So, because of that, then, and I don't understand the rule, and I've sat down and talked to the ladies at the health department at length, and it seems to be kind of a gray area, but nonetheless, that's the rules that I have to follow. So my food has to be cooked on site.
Yeah.
It's not a hamburger that I can cook in 5 minutes. It's smoked food, and it takes a long time to cook it low and slow. So
Okay, well, you answered my question.
Okay.
Like I say, I knew there was an obvious answer. I just
yeah.
understand why they were drawing that kind of a distinction.
Yes.
Now I do, so.
So I'm just trying to, go ahead, Councilman Bates. I'm just trying to understand this. If you had access to a commercial kitchen, Mr. Hinton, would you be able to cook there and then put it in your trailer and bring it
Yes.
there? Okay. But not everybody has access to a commercial
No, they
kitchen.
don't.
Okay. I know that Food for Thought is trying to get theirs up and
Yes,
running
they
for
are.
that
We
very
had a
reason.
Discussion about that.
Oh, good. That may be a long-term solution if we can't come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Councilman Bates.
What time are you thinking? You say 3 o'clock won't work. What, just out of curiosity, what would you like to see?
Well,
What's your idea?
again, it depends what I'm preparing for the day. Certain things take longer. Another brisket, for example, takes 12, 14 hours. So if serving time is 5 o'clock, then that has to be on pretty early in the morning. Pork butts, 10 hours. So I don't know. I can't tell you what time would fit for you, but for me, it would be no time. Now, I don't do this very often. I have a charity event at the Lyric on July 20th. And one of the foods that they want for that charity event is brisket. I can't set up in front of the building until 3 in the afternoon. There's no way that would get done. So it limits me. Now, I don't serve food all the time, but when I do, it would be nice to be able to set up
So,
timely manner for me to get done.
so you've been restricted like private parking lots or
Yes.
private events?
Yes.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've answered a number of questions for me, but it still appears we're sitting on second reading here. And we might consider asking staff to make sure that what we're talking about in terms of the exceptions that were going to be coming to us, if that would be covered, and have some of that explained to us before we go to third reading. That would give us a couple of weeks to look at some possible different language provisions and/or modifications to what we're proposing. Would that be helpful? This is one I hadn't thought of either. You know, I thought we were getting close to the end of this, but there's always.
Well, and just for everyone's understanding, the reason we came up with 3 o'clock was that would give people 2 hours to set up, and then they could start serving at 5 when restaurants were a lot of restaurants were closed down
Right.
by that.
I understand.
So it would give,
But one reason I asked is I really like some slow-cooked food once in a while.
well, it's a legitimate question he's bringing to our attention, so, obviously, so. Other questions, comments? How do people feel about asking staff to look at this time and see if there's some way we can craft? I wonder if there's some way we could make a distinction between preparing and serving.
Exactly, because what we've got is a situation that if he has a gig he wants to do, you know, out 2 weeks, we only do things and do things permanently on a 2-week basis. And maybe there's some way that we can allocate, or not allocate, but have that a special permit that only needs to be brought up, you know, every once in a while. That's just food for
Yeah, but the other issue we had was parking. And if the parking spaces are monopolized from early morning till late at night, then businesses are.
Food prep issue, there's no question about a hamburger, it doesn't take 16 hours. So,
Right, but the parking spaces are taken up. So that's one of the other issues. So what's the pleasure of council? Councilman Hopkins suggesting we revisit this as we move forward before we go to the third reading.
Mr. Mayor, I could see some potential benefit in revisiting this, but just sitting here thinking about it, I don't know how we would craft or resolve anything, because if we grant an exception that, well, okay, this nice man takes that many hours to cook something, and so then the next guy comes along and says, well, I want to be there for that same amount of hours, and oh, by the way, I'll be selling product while I'm there, and so then we really would have expanded the hours, and as you correctly pointed out, there's the issue of the parking and taking up parking spaces basically all day and everything. So I don't know if that's a resolvable question. Or if it's just one of those things that, yeah, it's a problem, and it's just a problem, unless if we want to really go in favor of one, allowing somebody that takes longer to cook and against somebody that doesn't take longer to cook. I don't see a way that we can really balance those things and resolve them with any amount of discussion.
Councilwoman Lutz.
I absolutely agree. I think it's going to boil down to being perceived as favoritism. Even though it's not, that's how it'll be perceived. Because what if, I don't know how cooking works, but things are going well and the food is ready earlier and he's like, I'm already here. I'm not saying that you break the rules, but my point being, it would be very hard to monitor these exceptions and monitor each and every time that somebody had something different. Or I think it's much easier to just not restrict things this fine-tuned. We paid for a super expensive parking study, and if anybody else remembers the results, we don't have a parking problem. So I don't really know.
If they're rotated, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, if the parking is rotated. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that I fall into this trap. I'm from a very small town. Sometimes we perceive it as, well, if I can't park right in front of it, I'll just go home. Like, what am I to do? Where you could park around the corner and walk to the establishment. And I think the other dangerous thing is saying, oh, well, most of the restaurants are closed by then. This is a capitalist country. Other institutions don't have to be closed for other ones to operate. That's not how this works. They can operate at the same time in the same areas. That'd be like saying we're going to start restricting the amount of restaurants downtown so that they can get their fair share.
Mr. Hinton, any more questions from Mr. Hinton? Then we could actually move on to a discussion here.
More discussion with the question.
And I think we're fine if you'd like to sit down, but we'll talk about this amongst ourselves for a little bit.
If I could say one more thing.
Yes, please.
I think Mr. Hopkins had a somewhat of a decent idea there, to come up with some kind of a special permit for certain circumstances, so you could maintain your comfortable time frame of 3 o'clock, but with a special permit that would allow someone like myself to bypass that rule for a day or two.
Okay.
Would be, if that's a possibility, I don't know.
We'll discuss that and other options, but thank you. Other comments on whether we should entertain this.
Just
Councilman
one more
Hopkins.
What we're really doing here is, what I was trying to do was avoid city council having to meet the requirements in section 4, which states, Friday hours, an extension of hours. Section 4, they have to come to council to get that, and I'm trying to find a way not to have to come to council.
Exactly.
If that's all they want, is a permit to start cooking at 3 a.m. to serve at noon, I'm not sure we need to be spending time on that in council. If council thinks we should, that's fine. But that just, it seems like we can do it with what we've got already started on the books at second reading. But my question is, do we want to be involved in permitting a given vendor as city council? So, thank you.
I mean, it seems to me that if we're concerned about people having adequate food preparation time, they shouldn't have to come to us on a case-by-case basis.
I agree. So do we have a chef on staff and they can say, that's okay? No, kidding.
Well, maybe we could taste test all of them.
That might be the answer.
I'm gonna suggest this, and maybe we'll see where it goes, but third reading would be in 2 weeks, and that's when it would become law. We have a number of things removed off of our July 9th menu, or agenda, and why don't people just think about this, and how would you feel about just putting this on the agenda for the 9th to see if there's some way to accommodate not just Mr. Hinton, but anyone else that is in a similar situation, and just remind ourselves why we came up with these times and these numbers, because we have a certain number per block that we allow, so that an entire block isn't taken up with vendors when we haven't.
The wording change would be small. It would be city council or their designee.
And we have 2 council members missing tonight, so is everyone okay with that? We'll put that on the agenda for the 9th to see if there's further appetite on this. Is that all right?
As tabling it tonight and then discussing it?
No, I think we could go ahead and pass on second reading if it's okay with everyone, and then we would see if we would all agree upon an amendment that we would make on third reading, is what I'm suggesting. Councilman Friel.
I just have one question, and I think it's for you, Mr. Hinton. And this is just so that when we go further with discussion, and I'm just having a thought in my mind. So with the health department itself, they're telling you have to prepare food on site.
Correct.
So that means that you can't move. Once you put it in place, you can't move at all.
Right.
Okay.
Unless it's prepared in a commercial kitchen, which
yes,
could be a possibility if that option is available.
And I guess where I'm kind of heading with this is that if there was a, I mean, we're talking downtown, if we had a location of which, when you have a situation where that Mr. Hinton's in, where he has to prepare it, but instead of having to change the hours, if the health department allow it to move a block or a very short distance to actually set up, if we had a place that was off the street that we could provide somehow for people in that situation, then that would resolve the whole thing with time frames. They could go to the prep area, if you will, and prepare their food, and then when the time hits, they could move into place. But that's not really a question for you to answer. I mean, that's something we'd have to talk to the health department about, of how that would work, but just a thought.
You all are invited, by the way, to stop by wherever I'm set up, and I would be more than happy to provide you with some samples. So,
As long as it's worth less than $250.
oh yes, yes. It's
Mr. City Manager, would you care? I think you can have a seat, but we'll just continue this with.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as good luck and fortune would have it, we do have the the Health Department attending our meeting on the 9th to discuss issues pertaining to the daily pass, if you recall. And I see it very appropriate to extend that conversation to include this question, because I think they'll have a lot of insight that will be beneficial to help us understand what potential opportunities we might have to amend this ordinance further or not, if needs be.
They may have some state statutes they're
Absolutely.
having to comply with, yeah. And nothing for you to report this evening on our state lease that people have questioned us about with the Goodstein property.
Mr. Mayor, actually, to answer your question, we are making dramatic progress. And as a matter of fact, the state has in their hands a lease agreement that the attorney and I have reviewed. And with any luck, within a couple of weeks, we'll be able to bring something forward to you to look at in preparation for a formal consideration.
And if that comes to pass, and I don't want to tease anyone or make any promises, but if that comes to pass, there would be a space with no time restrictions downtown. So, just wouldn't be on Second Street. Any other discussion on this? And we'll talk about that next week. Okay. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. You're right. There are more worms than I care to count on this. So. I'm sorry, Councilman Bates.
No problem. I still, and I don't know where council's at, I still would like to totally take away number 5 on Saturdays and Sundays, 1 p.m. to 3 a.m. I'd just like to see that go away completely. I don't know how the rest of the council, it's Saturdays and Sundays. I look at it as, 1 p.m. to 1 p.m. is sometimes the busiest down there, more so than 10 o'clock in the morning. So on the weekends, I don't know. I'd still like to ex-nay the entire number 5.
Okay. Well, we can talk about any amendments that council wishes to entertain next week. So with those plans in place, any further discussion or amendments this evening?
Is there any appetite from anyone to table this? The reason I say that is if we do second reading, I understand that we have time at the work session, but then we're still at third reading right after that. And I am sure you can all agree with me that it would be nice that, I don't know, maybe once every 4 years we have a meeting or two that isn't involving food trucks. I feel like we still have some discussion with this, and maybe we can just take a deep breath and make sure we're doing it at least as right as we can, so that this isn't just a forever loop.
Okay, does feel that way.
Yes.
Would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to motion to table this.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Discussion on the motion. Do we discuss the motion to table, Mr. Henley?
I think there may be a question from Councilman Huber. I don't know if it's a motion to table or a motion to table to the dates.
Good point. What do you?
So maybe I could make the motion to table to the next city council meeting after the work session. Sorry, I don't know dates.
August 5th or 6th?
2nd, 9th, 16th. Is it?
6th?
16th? 16th? Sorry, July 16th.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, July 16th. Okay. Well, wait a minute. The third reading is July 16th, so the first meeting in August would be August 6th. Is that correct? So if you're going to skip a meeting, it would be the 6th.
Yeah, because we got 2 weeks between now and July 16th.
Third.
So you want to skip the July 16th meeting?
And go to the August meeting.
No, sorry, I was just saying tabling the second reading until we can do the work session next week.
I see what you're saying.
So push the second reading to the next meeting.
Thank you. Just a little slow on the uptake there. Okay. So that was your second, Councilman Frias? Yes. To postpone second reading to the 16th. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Huber.
I would argue against tabling this. I think, we need to move along with this to have some certainty and bring some of these uncertainties to a conclusion. We've already frittered away a good part of the food truck season with unnecessary, with uncertainty about this. I think we need to move along with it and if there's some revelation that comes along, some idea or something, I think that we got time between now and the third reading to look into that.
Other discussion on the motion to table? Councilman Bates?
When we decided to do this, this was all due to allowing Lou Tower to have a vendor in front of his place. It wasn't about the food trucks. It wasn't about anything but that reason to allow exceptions. So I don't see us hindering the food trucks or anything like that by tabling it and waiting until the 16th to do the second motion. So I agree. Well, I think we should get it clarified, make sure that the wording is correct, like Bob said, or Councilman Hopkins said, and make sure we do it right, as Councilwoman Lutz said regarding it. So I'm in favor of waiting until the 16th for the second reading.
Any other opinions on this? Okay. I can go with the table motion, so just skip a meeting. Might give us a little more time to find out where we are with the state as well, so that we could maybe solve a few problems at the same time. Okay. Well, please cast your vote on the motion to table.
With council members Hopkins, Johnson, and Huber voting nay. Do we need what?
Is it the majority or quorum?
Yep.
Yeah, we're testing you, Mr. Henley.
Maybe the majority of those present. It's the majority of those present.
I think you're right. It's a majority of those present. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to table passes.
Okay, please, so.
Motion to table passed.
Thank you. Now, please read the consent resolutions by title only.
Item 9A1, authorizing 29 resolutions for agreements for the use of optional 1% number 16 sales tax special funds, special project funds. Item 9A2, a resolution authorizing the submission of a grant application to the U.S. Department of Transportation for 2019 Build Transportation Discretionary Grant for Midwest Avenue improvements. Item 9A3, a resolution authorizing an agreement with Wayne Coleman Construction, Inc. for the 2019 Solid Waste Asphalt Improvements Project. Item 94, a resolution authorizing a contract for professional services with Stantec Consulting Services, Inc. for the North Platte River Restoration First Street Reach Project. Item 9A5, a resolution authorizing change order number 1 with Casper Building Systems, Inc. for the Compost Equipment Building Heating Project. Item 9A6, a resolution authorizing an M54 license with the Wyoming Department of Transportation for installation of a water distribution line to serve the Topol Addition. Item 9A7, a resolution authorizing a contract for professional services with Civil Engineering Professionals, Inc. for the 2020 Water System Master Plan Project. Item 8, a resolution authorizing an agreement between the City of Casper and the United States Department of the Interior, Bureau of Reclamation. Item 9A9, a resolution authorizing a professional services contract with Recycling Industrial Repairs, Inc. for the Baylor Extension of Ejection Ram System Project. Item 9A10, a resolution authorizing submission of a grant application to the Wyoming Department of Transportation for the Transportation Alternatives Program for the Midwest Avenue Bike Lane and Pedestrian Development Project. And item 9A11, a resolution authorizing a memorandum of understanding with Flag Development, LLC for the real property generally described as the former Plains Furniture Properties.
Chair would entertain a motion to adopt the consent resolutions just read.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilwoman Lutz. Mr. City Manager, would you like to talk about any of these matters to explain them to the public?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, one of the items that I'd like to highlight is with regard to item 9A11 as it relates to the Plains property project. This is the first formal step that initiates that project, if you will, in that this does lay out the terms by which that project would be developed. It's not the final step, however. We do have a purchase agreement that needs to take place pursuant to the closing happening, and then, of course, the project will be on its way.
Okay. Thank you. Any abstentions or nay votes?
Your Honor,
Councilman Friel.
I'll abstain from 9A11.
Okay. Please, Councilman Bates.
I will go nay for 9A11, and if I can explain.
Oh, you can do that when we go around.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
With the abstention of Councilmember Friel and the nay vote of Councilmember Bates noted, motion passed.
Thank you. Please read the consent minute action titles.
Item 10A1, authorizing the appointment of new members Ryan McIntyre and Tony Hager to the Town Down Development Authority Board of Directors. And item 10A2, rejecting the bid submitted for the wastewater treatment plant digester boiler installation project.
Thank you. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent minute action items just read.
So move.
I'll second that.
Moved by Councilman Friel, seconded by Councilman Huber. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote, and please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed.
Thank you. Now is when we go around, and you'll have an opportunity to explain your vote then. How about we start with you, Councilman Huber? What do you have this evening for us?
Nothing.
Okay. Councilman Friel?
Nothing tonight.
Vice Mayor Johnson?
I just wanted to comment on the 1 cent projects. I think Mr. Goodenough made a really valid point. And I do think we should do a better job on keeping up on the progress of these projects, and see, how they're coming along, what they're doing now. What the Masterson Place was a really good example. I'd actually personally like to see that information. So I just think we need to do a better job on, I guess, being updated on how these projects are coming along, since they are public funds.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hopkins?
The only thing I have is on Monday night, the OYD Advisory Committee met, and they put their unanimous support behind 9A2 to go forward with the grant for the rest of Midwest. Obviously, they like that.
Anything else? Councilwoman Lutz?
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Bates?
Just to clarify why I voted no for this. Haven't made it a real secret from the very get-go regarding it. K-Lark's market was 3,000 or 300,000, sold for 3,500 or 300,500. The profit was a 500. Milo's sold for 217,000. Market was 217,000 for it. It sold for 220. That was a 3,000 profit. The market, from what I've heard, what I've been told, for the Plains Furniture was $1.4 million. We are selling it for $500,000. We are taking a loss of $900,000 of the city citizens, taxpayers' money. It was purchased, and we're taking a huge loss. And I think their idea, Flag's idea for it, is fantastic. I think it's a gorgeous, if it looks as good as the pictures was presented, I think it'd be gorgeous. But to take that big of a loss, I have a problem with that. And especially also as a citizen that pays taxpayers. So that's the only reason why I said no.
Anything else this evening?
Nope.
Okay. And I will also comment on that. I voted yes. I do believe that that appraised value was inflated, and there's an old saying in the real estate business that the actual value of a property is what a willing buyer will pay to a willing seller. And we put it up for open bid, and it was available for an extended period of time, and this is what the bid was, and it was the best bid we got. So, okay. The next meetings of the City Council will be a work session to be held 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, July 9th, 2019 in the Council's meeting room, and a regular Council meeting to be held at 6 p.m. Tuesday, July 16th, 2019 in the Council chambers. Now, notice of an executive session to take place at this date and during this meeting was given. We have a matter to discuss regarding personnel and property acquisition. Therefore, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session, and at the conclusion of that executive session to reconvene this regular meeting solely for the purpose of adjournment of this regular meeting. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins. Not to adjourn, excuse me, to adjourn into executive session, and seconded by Councilman Friel. There being a majority of members present and a motion to adjourn into an executive session having been moved and seconded, and that motion requiring a 2/3 majority of council present, please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passed. Oh, there we go.
Somehow Ray voted, but.
Look under that desk there. Hiding under there.
What's going on here?
Motion passed.
Motion passes. You've got the vote correct then. Okay. A greater than 2/3 majority of the council present voted in favor of the motion. We are therefore adjourned into an executive session.